Hi everyone, my name is Cynthia. Let's talk books. And actually today I'm really going to ask you for your input. I really want to have a talk about historical fiction, and this conversation is really coming out of a comment that Courtney Farrader made on her channel recently. I discovered her channel really just a couple of weeks ago because I think Doris at All the Books mentioned her and that she's a literature professor, and so I immediately went and subbed. I've really been enjoying her content, and so I'm going to link the video that I'm referencing down below, but you should definitely go check out her channel. I will also link Doris down below. But so Courtney made a comment about the state of historical fiction and really how boring it can be, and it really got me thinking. For me as a reader and as a historian, I feel like a lot of the most popular historical fiction is boring and not interesting. Hold on before you anybody trashes me. I think Courtney was right, because when I look at a lot of the popular historical fiction list, so much of it tends to revolve around World War II. So much of it, especially World War II in Europe, and there's only so much you can do with that. There are things now that people expect out of that kind of fiction: the extreme sadness, the death, the violence, the racism. There's certain expectations in that genre, and there's the kind of emotional journey that readers expect out of that kind of historical fiction that the author then needs to deliver on. So books that engage with World War II tend to sometimes just not be very interesting, right? And even when they are interesting, they don't necessarily teach you something new about the time period, and they don't do anything literary very interesting for the genre. And I do think that's very true. On the other hand, I think that there is a section within historical fiction that is doing really interesting, really good things, but that it tends to be written by non-white authors. And it was so funny because I made some comment kind of summarizing some of what I just said in Courtney's video, and then she asked me for recommendations of good historical fiction. And the funny thing is that I don't read a lot of historical fiction anymore. I don't. And so this is where I am asking you for your feedback, because part of what I'm thinking is that I used to read a lot of historical fiction. I devoured everything, all historical fiction on World War II, everything about the Civil War, about the slave trade. Those were the kinds of time periods that tend to be the most popular and that I really liked when I was young. There's a reason why those are really popular. But once I went to graduate school and started, learning history at such an intense level, and then got my PhD in history, I have really become much more critical of historical fiction. And this is where I think sometimes when I read historical fiction, I can be a little bit unfair to the books, because I'm looking for historical accuracy. And the thing about historical fiction is that the main point of historical fiction is not to teach you history. If you want to learn history, you go to nonfiction. You don't start with historical nonfiction necessarily. But historical fiction can be a great entry point to get people interested in the actual history, right? And this works for fiction at all levels. One of the things that happens a lot in my classical civilizations course, for example, is that students come in and they love the movie 300. That movie is especially directed at young men, right? So the young men in my classrooms usually love that movie, except that movie is incredibly historically inaccurate and it's pretty racist. We discussed all of this in the class. But for a lot of the men that really loved this movie, that was their entry point, right? That's what got them interested in the topic. And then they signed up when they had the option to take a course on this history. And that's why I don't dismiss and I don't devalue historical fiction, historical movies, or anything like that, because I do think that there's value even when the history is wrong. that there can still be value in that, and that historians could take advantage of that. But what do you guys think? Like, do you find value in a historian reviewing works of historical fiction? That's really the main point of feedback that I would like from everybody, because like, I'm thinking about it, and I was thinking about how I stopped reading a lot of historical fiction because as a historian I feel I can be very unfair to the books that I read on it, especially when they're set in France, because that's my area of specialty, right? French history and European history in general. And so I tend to read those much more critically, and when there is inaccuracy, to really kind of ding the book a lot for that. And I'm wondering what you all make of that. I usually, when I review works of historical fiction, because I have done that here, I've reviewed books set in World War II, in France during World War II, and I am very open about, hey, this is where I'm coming from. I have too much knowledge on this topic, so you do that with that review what you must. On the other hand, I do sometimes read books of historical fiction that are really, really excellent. Works in my area of specialty that I just love. And I think when I've posted reviews of these books and talked about them, they tend to be valued by those of you that watch my channel, that comment on my channel, and that's why I really wanted to ask. Like, when I'm talking about specific books, like, I'll name a few right here. I have an entire video reviewing Sweet Française by Irène Némirovsky. This is a book that was written by a Jewish woman in France during World War II. She eventually died in a Nazi concentration camp, and so her work was later published. One of the main things that makes this book so incredible, though, is that it really takes an honest look at collaboration in France and really challenges the idea of France as a nation of resistance during World War II, which was a myth that was created at the end of World War II and really popularized by people like Charles de Gaulle. So, but this book is really excellent because it takes a much more honest look at the regular everyday ways in which the French people collaborated with an occupying force. Another book that I recently read, and I think is a marvelous piece of historical fiction, is Bel-Ami by Guy de Maupassant. So this is set in the Belle Epoque France, and really digs into social class and the world of newspaper during this time, how sensationalized it was, social mobility and what social climbing could look like during this time, women's roles in this period. There's just so much to dig into this book historically. Like, this is a book that I could use in a class about 19th century France and could really dig into. It has its limits as well, but overall, like, I found this to be a really great piece of historical fiction, but of course it's not a recent published book. Another book along those same lines is Émile Zola's The Lady's Paradise, and this is one of my all-time classic French novels because it deals with the history of the department store and women coming onto the public sphere and kind of occupying places in the public sphere, in the streets of Paris, but also in the workforce, particularly through the department stores. I haven't read this in a few years, so this is a newer copy that I intend to read. It's in my Reading the French Classics list, so eventually you'll see a review of this up in my channel, but I think this is a really, really excellent novel. Do you sense a theme, though, with the books that I tend to love? They tend to be kind of more historically correct books dealing with French history. One that does not engage with those topics is The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker. I found this to be excellent. Now, this does not fit under the historical fiction so neatly because it's a retelling of the Iliad. But at the same time, it engages with a lot of those historical topics. And actually, this is a book that I've recommended and I've used in my course. I used to teach a course called Classical Civilizations in the Modern World. So we really, students had the option of reading this book and writing about it and the way in which it engaged with an old myth ancient history but retold for a modern audience. So that's why I'm putting it in here, because I think it's very useful in a history course used in that particular way. And so I have firsthand experience of how wonderfully this worked in a history class. I have read other works of historical fiction that kind of play with the genre. I recently read the Book of Echoes, and I'll be talking about that in my wrap-up soon. That is the Read So Lit book that Didi over at Brown Girl Reading is hosting, and it's a book that engages with the history and the legacy of slavery in Nigeria and in London. So I think that's an excellent one. There have been a lot of books recently that have been really excellent, engaging with the theme of race and things like that. What I did for this video was go into my shelves and grab the books that fit into the historical fiction category and that I had handy. So some of the ones that I could have fit. So that speaks more to the limits of my bookshelf and the constraints of making these videos. The last time I taught a course on French history was modern France, and one of the assignments I did for the class was I had students pick a book set in France, a work of historical fiction, and then write about it, engage with it from a historian's point of view, right? Engage from it as people that had taken a course on modern history, knew the history, and then discussed the historical themes in the novel. So I'm always happy to share teaching materials to any teachers out there, so if anybody is interested in that, I can share the assignment I did. The assignment ended up working really well. There are changes I would do to it, as always, because it was the first time I was doing an assignment like that. But I've been doing more of that in my classes because I think that fiction can be a really great way of engaging with history. It comes with its problems, though. It comes with its problems, and so again, what I am asking you all is, how do you feel about a historian reviewing works of historical fiction, right? Particularly about me. How would you feel about me reviewing historical fiction more on this channel? Because that's something that I'm open to it, especially if you are all interested in it. One of the things that I did was go into the Goodreads nominations for historical fiction. So the list of the books nominated for the Goodreads Choice Awards for 2020 just came out. I'm looking at all the books on the historical fiction category. I have not read a single one of these books. Not a single one. I own one of them, but I'm thinking that something that might be interesting for me to do is maybe for 2021, read all the books in this list and review them as a kind of project, probably like the first half of 2021. How do you all feel about that? How do you consume reviews by historians of these kinds of books? Like, do you appreciate them? Do you take them with a grain of salt? Do you skip them? That would be fine for me to hear. You know what, if there's no interest in me doing that kind of video and I don't want to do it, then I won't do it, right? But I'm starting to get a little bit of a bug to maybe do this project, and if even if nobody watches those videos, if it's something enjoyable for me, I might still do it. But I'd be really interested in your feedback. So let me know what you think down below. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.